Hello, welcome to the March 3rd, 2026 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you've not attended a live stream before, how it works is you could ask questions in the live chat field, or simply questions can be submitted in advance to Club Cubase. Let me just turn off my monitoring computer. You could also send questions in advance to clubcubase at steinberg.de. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer questions in kind of a real-time manner may soon be impossible. With the number of questions coming in, we'll go through all the questions chronologically as asked. And when asking questions, if you could specify like which version of the program you're running. So if you're on Cubase, it could be Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, or other Steinberg titles, what version numbers, if it's 13, 14, 15. Also, which operating system that information is helpful. We should have an index of all of the topics covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field several hours after the live stream ends with timestamps so that you can quickly navigate to particular topics. If you want to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. And we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating that site. We have two people that serve as moderators. So we have Ancient K and Jazz Dude. They're not Steinberg employees. They do it to make it a better community experience. And we want to give special thanks to them. We'll also give it an extra round of gratitude for Jazz Dude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. It's a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So if you are, if you're looking for different tutorials, downloads, links, articles, it's a great kind of place, to search for those particular resources. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I primarily focus on Steinberg products. And I'm the host today. I'm presenting from just outside of Washington, D.C. area in the United States, from Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live or watching it afterwards, please feel free to introduce yourself. And with that, we will go ahead and begin. All right, so you see, question was asked earlier. It says, Epic to Go 1986. Hi, Greg. When I automate a track and then press Control-D to copy the track, the automation duplicates also, but I don't want that. How to fix this? Okay, so let's say I have this particular event here on this track and I have some automation on it, and now when I go to duplicate, the default settings are when an event is duplicated that the automation itself is duplicated as well. So we can see that the automation moved right along with the event. If we do not want to include the automation, we could go to your edit menu and uncheck automation follows events. So now when I duplicate the event, Control plus D or Command, if you're on Mac OS plus D, we can see that the automation is not duplicated. But when we go to edit and we place a check mark to automation follows events, now when we duplicate a particular event, the automation will be incorporated and included with the copied event. So again, go to edit and you can just uncheck automation follows events. Just one quick programming note, just for those of us who are on the Zoom social meetup, I want to give a special thanks to David Kahn for spending over an hour and a half sharing kind of insights on his projects and stuff on the last Zoom social. So I want to extend my gratitude for David for just kind of popping in and meeting everyone and sharing insights. So those are very, very wonderful, as always, to talk to David. Hang on one second. Sorry about that. I have a worker at the house. I need to turn a pipe off. All right, let's move on. All right, so we see from Sabertooth Bicycle, Tim K joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. We see Stefan joining from Sweden. All right, Parabot2 asks, hi Greg, would you mind talking a little bit about Beatles and Stones Tune Cubase instruments? Yeah, let's go ahead and open it. So it's all stock instruments. So this is a project I got from my friend Vince Melmed, who's a wonderful writer. He's kind of a journeyman, sideman for many people. He's worked with, he was like the touring keyboard player with the Eagles, and he's worked with Dan Fogelberg, Bob Dylan, Roseanne Cash, Jimmy Buffett. So let's go ahead and just, we'll take a listen to some of the different instruments here. All right, just let me check, see why we're not hearing. All right, so with this, we're going to have a guitar drum loop. When we go to the Mellotron, this is going to be utilizing just one of the Halion instruments. So that's the Haliotron. I think we have a drum loop. And then also Groove Agent drums. So just one of the standard kits from the kit for Groove Agent. I think we might have some tambourine parts, like a tambourine loop. And let's see if we have, like, this might be like a little bit of a vocal. With the Mellotron, some oohs and ahs. It's just going to be a giant ooh choir in Halion. Also have piano. That's from the Eagle. And then we're going to have, I think, some bass. So that's the Electric Bass VX preset in Halion. And then we're going to have some brass and strings. So from Studio Strings. And the brass is coming from Halion Symphonic Orchestra. So it's pretty much all stock sounds except for like the guitar.
Records into the night. I turn it up, you wouldn't mind.
And on the vocal, we're just using again all stock plugins.
That was okay. Guess all along I was so naive.
So the guitar sends just a little bit of reverence.
Now you're packing boxes, ready to leave. Our musical history laid out on the the floor.
So when I got this, I got kind of a bare bones demo from Vince, and then, you know, I probably replaced some of the sounds with stock plugins inside of Cubase. I think I added the strings and brass parts, you know, probably to be a little George Martin-esque when those come in, but it's really just kind of all stock sounds with that. And it says, also, how did you route them through Halion? Great tune. Will it be released? So I'm not sure if it ever got picked up for a song. I think Sable Winters, who's on the live streams, that she might be releasing a version of it after hearing it here. But I don't think that, you know, I think it's a wonderful song. It's a shame that it hasn't been released. We've had lots of people that was like, oh, such a great song. But you know, I'm not a publisher, so and probably why I get to use it is because it hasn't been released, and Vince has kind of allowed me to use the project. But you know, it's pretty much all stock sounds except for like, you know, the guitar is probably a guitar loop that Vince used and a vocal, but everything else that you hear is directly from stock kind of Cubase and Halion sounds. So. All right. Yeah, but you could Google Vince Malmed, and he did kind of a single release not too long ago, or an album release. All right, I need to go adjust the pipe. I'll be right back. Okay, hopefully it's the last interruption. Sorry about that. All right. We see Uno Memento joining from Finland, VS Terra Nova joining from Amsterdam. All right, Baba Saw says, in case my previous question got nixed, can you talk about Halion? I use Kontakt for orchestral sample libraries. Does Halion offer any benefits over it in terms of efficiency and routing? So I think it is a very efficient instrument. I don't know Kontakt intimately, but I'll show you some stuff that we can do in Halion that are kind of unique. One is you're going to have a 5.1 output. Let me just see if I need to activate my license real quick. Bear with me. All right, well, I should have a license for it. Let me just... So I think obviously one of the things is, you know, Steinberg Halion's been around longer than Kontakt. it's going to be able to, I'm not sure if Kontakt can utilize multiple CPU threads. So let me just say, if I wanted to come over, so let me just bear with me for a second. I'll see if I can. All right. Let me see. I think we might be able to trigger it now. Should work off my Absolute 7 license as well. I'm gonna just exit out of my Cubase real quick. Let's see if we get. Sorry about this. Let me see if I can. So, one of the things that you'll also see is kind of, all right, so I think we're close. Sorry about that. All right. All right, so when we're working with Halion, so we could have 32 stereo outputs. We also have a 5.1 output. Some of the other options that you're going to have is the ability to come over, and if you have multi-core computers, which just about everyone has, you can now allocate Halion to work across multiple cores. So if you have lots of instruments kind of loaded into a single instance of it. Also, we could come over and do lots of stuff within Halion for kind of doing MPE stuff. It was first sampler to support kind of note expression type of functions. So let's say if I want to come over here to a violin part, and we have, let's say, a chord. We can come over and just choose to double click on a note in the chord and say we want this to do kind of note expression. So if I want to adjust the tuning of one particular note, I could just kind of come over here, and while that note is playing, we could have kind of independent pitch bend or volumes on notes within a chord. So if I want this note to get louder and softer while the other notes stay the same level. So if I come over here, we'll take off one shot. So while the note is playing, we could change the dynamics and do different stuff like that. Now, if you're dealing with orchestral libraries, if it's a Halion based instrument, a lot of times you may have like expression maps for all of your articulations. So if it is a Halion based instrument, when you come over here, you could just click on the plus sign, and then you could automatically import all of the key switches for note expression maps directly into Halion, so they could add all of your articulations for your particular instruments. Whereas Kontakt, I believe you still have to kind of make all of the expression maps manually. But here we could just go to your expression map setup, and we could just have it in Halion. Halion, as part of the VST3 specification, can automatically extract all of the articulations for particular instruments and have those automatically done, so you don't have to spend like tens of hours building expression maps manually or tweaking someone else's expression maps that they created. So it's going to be incredibly robust. Obviously, it's done by Steinberg. Steinberg's been around for more than 40 years. Run by Yamaha. It's been around for more than 135 years. So there's a lot of legacy there as well. All right. Sorry about my licensing issue. All right, we see Rick France from Pacific Northwest. We see Vince, that's Fly V from Winnipeg, Canada. It's great to see you on the Zoom social. I see Tim Weinheimer on. It's great to see you on the Zoom social as well. All right, we see Beverly Beatty joining us from Vancouver, Canada. Thanks for joining us, being part of the community today. I see Peter from Montreal. Says where it's getting warmer with every passing day, so that's good. Yeah, we had snow yesterday afternoon, which kind of turned into rain, and by Friday it's supposed to be 72 degrees. So, all right. So Jazz Dude says yes, it was a great Zoom meeting. Secret insider info shared. So. Yeah, I never realized that he worked with James Brown. So, all right. So we see from Papa Vol says hi from somewhere over Montana. Thanks to Starlink on his Hawaiian Airlines flight. Well, I hope you're going to Hawaii. It's a beautiful place to go. My family and I love going to Maui. See, Peter is just saying, yes, the last Zoom meeting was incredibly insightful and entertaining. Thanks to David. All right, so we see from a question from Tim Weinheimer, how do you change chord inversions on the chord track? Okay, so let me just open up. Okay, so let's say we have a chord track laid out for us here, and we will put this on for our Rhodes. Let me see if I have a MIDI. Just go to this instrument real quick, see if we have. Okay, so let's say. All right, so we hear the chords and now we want to hear inversions. So if we come right over here to all right, so if we want to just take this particular chord, you know, we could just say, okay, now I want to, if we drag this, let's say, to our Rhodes part here, then when we go to chords, let's say, and as we add, let's say if we add a chord here to the top, so let's say we just add an F major chord. So let me just see if our voicings. Okay, so let's say if we go to adaptive voicings here, I could just kind of switch the different chord inversions. So if you select the chord track itself and uncheck adaptive voicings, then we can have the same chord but just different inversions and different alternates here. So any of the chords, we could just kind of come right over here. So under the voicing category. So make sure that adaptive voicing is turned off, and then we can just simply adjust like so. All right, so we see from Beverly Beatties this question: if I don't know the music scale that I'm writing the song in, is there a way for Cubase 15 to detect it? So I can use the chord pads. If I want to write chords, I even use a melodic pattern editor. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at a song where we will, let's come over here. All right, so let's say I don't know what the chords are in this song. So let's say we'll just listen to it here. So we have acoustic guitar, vocal, some piano.
Do you recall the day we
So I have a chord track open, and what I want to do is drag something that has chords, whether it's MIDI or an audio part. I'm going to take the guitar part, and now it's automatically kind of, it has taking the chords from our song here. Let's go to, and we could see what the key of the song is. So we can see, okay, we're in A major. Now if we go to our chord pads, I think that we could extract the chords from the chord track if I'm right. Okay, so now I have my chords here laid out in my chord track, and we see these like three, almost looks like three hi-hat cymbals or three cymbals. So we look at my chords here in my chord pads. Now I could assign those particular chords from my song that we see here, and these could be laid out directly into the chord pads. And if I have a pattern editor open, so let's add an instrument track. Let's come over here, we'll make it a pattern. Let's say we'll come over here, we'll do Halion Sonic. And now when we come over here, let's say we want to edit the pattern, so we can say melodic pattern. We see our chord lane. So what I can do now is say, okay, I want an A major chord, and we'll say our chord input. So I'll just drag the chord down, and now we could have a pattern based on the A chord. Or if we want to go to our chord input, we could just say, let's make it our D chord, and we could now just have our chord kind of based upon the particular input here. So if we want a B minor seventh, I could just drag that particular chord in, and then we could have that. So drag an event to the chord track within the chord pads. We could also just come right over here, click on this icon, and the chord pads will be populated with the chords that were extracted from the audio event. And when we're in the pattern editor, just make sure you have the chord input, and then we could just drag the chords straight down as well. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Beverly. All right, so you see from Papa Vol, who asks, can you explain if there is a way to use the different pages of control shown in the track instrument panel on the right to seed/setup controls for an instrument? Okay, so let's say I want to go to, we have an instrument, so we'll come over here. So we have the Verve piano in this track, part of Absolute 7 as well. All right, so let's say we have a number of controls. So we could come over here to any of the instruments, and we could say, go to the remote control editor. So usually by default, we could see that we have like one bank of 8 controls. So here I'm going to say we have basically eight quick controls for our standard layout, but maybe we have more than, different parameters here. I'll just do with a synthesizer because we have more parameters. So let me just come over. Let's add a retro log. All right, so we have more than Let me just do the little license dance here real quick. Sorry about that. I'll just load up a different instrument. Let's see if I could just get this sorted out so we could do it later. I'll just show it with another plugin here real quick. Sorry about that. All right. So let's say if we wanted to map parameters, whether it's an instrument or like an effect. So if I come over here, let's go to a plugin with a lot of parameters, maybe like, let's say our VST bass amp. All right, so here we have kind of our, we have 8 parameters that could be used as quick controls. When we come over here, we see this little drop-down menu. We can say, let's go to the remote control editor, but we could have other parameters here. So let's say if I have in my MIDI remote, I want to come over here. Let's see if we have this set up for quick controls. Okay, so I have my quick controls set up here. So when I go to a particular plugin, I could control kind of my default values here. But what I want to do now is if I need to get to, in the remote control editor, other banks of parameters. So what we could do now is within the MIDI remote, I'm going to just assign, let's say, this particular button. And when we come over here, we'll say mapping page actions. Let me see if it's... Okay, so under mapping page actions, we can say next mapping page. So I want this button here to do next mapping page and this one to do previous mapping page. Okay, so now when I move a parameter, I can just say, okay, I move my quick controls. Let's see if we're on. I'll assign this to like a quick control here. Okay, so now I could control kind of the plugin parameters here. And now when I hit the button, I could go to the next mapping page. And now when I control, and just when I go to next or previous mapping page, we could now control different parameters. So just come over here and you want to just go to mapping page. So you could activate the next mapping page or the previous mapping page. And then when you hit that button, we go from the first bank of controls that we see here in the remote control editor to the second bank of controls or to the third bank of controls. So if I wanted to come over here, we can say next mapping page. It may not be a mapping page. Let me just make sure I have this right. So say if we go over here. So I think the mapping page will change to presets, but let me just get this correct here. Sorry about that. Just look for the correct. me just look for a bank. That might be the term I'm looking for. Sorry, I'm just having a brain cramp on this, but there is a way to basically map to like the next. I'll take just a minute, see if I can find it real quick. But basically, let's see if it's maybe under. Yeah, I'll see if I get the answer. I'll see if I can circle back to this, but there is a way to basically switch between, and I did a video on it. If you look in the Cubase Q&A, I'm just having a brain cramp on it. Let me just see. I don't think that's it. But yeah, there is a way just to do that, and I could have an answer for on Friday's live stream if I can't figure it out. Sorry about that. All right, so FlyV just asked, I've noticed when I start up Cubase, sometimes my main template instrument, my main template inst there, and it comes back somehow. What is doing this? So if you're not kind of seeing it in the hub, make sure that there is a dividing line between like your projects and your hub. So make sure that it's kind of divided, and also that if you see like your recent files, make sure that that is also kind of expanded. So if I come here, we could close or expand the recent projects or templates. So make sure that, and it's kind of like a divided area to navigate between those two. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Vince. So Papa Vol says, was there any particular mixing approaches taken with the Beatles and Stones track? It all sounded very crisp and well defined. So it didn't really do anything special. I just tried to make sure that stuff wasn't breaking and stuff wasn't clashing in the mix. So probably helps to have a great song from Vince Melamed. It's always helpful to have a great song. All right. It's probably like why so many great classical pieces sound great as MIDI orchestration for like when you're using it in a MIDI sequence, because Schubert was good and knew how to orchestrate well. All right, so we see Jay from Secret Studios just saying hello to everyone. Memento wants people to whack the like button. And Jazz Dude's just commenting on mixes. It's not overloaded with low frequencies like most EDM and metal. Always try to be judicious with bass as a bass player. All right, so we see Roland Stuff joining from Sussex, England. Says where spring has sprung. So that's good. All right, so Roland Stuff says, hi, Greg. When recording a Cubase 15 instrument using an external keyboard, some notes look as though they are being quantized. So, for example, if I'm playing quarter notes, they appear as half notes starting at the same point. I hope this makes sense. I've tried this with two keyboards. I get the same results. Any thoughts, please? So on the transport, make sure that you don't have a cue turned on. So this is like a quantize on input. So if I'm coming over here, let's say if I am playing a piano part, so let's say if I'm recording something, my quantize value is set to half note, and I want to record like quarter notes. All right, so now we will go back and listen to what I just recorded and see if it shows up as quarter notes. All right, so we see that that is now half notes because I had AQ on. Now, if you've done a bunch of recordings and it's like, oh, I had the best recording ever, and then the appearance, it was quantized on input, is it forever gone? Can I get back to the original? So to get back to the original, what you want to do is just to come right over there, go to Edit, and you could choose to reset quantize. So if I'm looking at this event here, we can see we have our half notes when we record it, quarter notes. So if I go to my edit and choose to reset quantize, even though we quantized on input, the original data is still there. So if you reset quantize, then all the information will show up. So see if you have the auto quantize, and this is basically like a quantize on input enabled right there in the transport. And you could always test it by selecting the event, edit, to reset quantize as well. All right, so we have Cliff Scherer joining from Germany. Thanks for being online with us. All right, Beverly Beatty says, thank you, Greg, for explaining it. Going to give it a whirl. Yeah, let us know if it makes sense. We see Benny joining from Sweden. All right, so Conscious Power asks how to remove a process of clicking remove automation in Groove Agent when adjusting parameters of layered sample individually. All right, so give this a try. Okay. All right. All right, so say if we come over here to our player, all right, so let's say if I'm automating a parameter here, so let's say I'm going to take the hi-hat and I'm going to automate, let's say just from the start, just have this sync with our project tempo. All right, so as I'm playing here, I'm going to automate just the pitch of the hi-hat. All right, so let's just jump back. All right, so we see the automation. How to remove the process of clicking remove automation in Groove Agent when adjusting multiple parameters. So let me adjust the volume here as well. So I will go ahead and begin here. So let's say I want to adjust the volume on a hi-hat. All All right, so let's say we have different automation going on. So we have the volume as well as my coarse tuning. So if I wanted to remove automation when adjusting parameters of layered sample, so if I wanted to just remove like one of the automation parameters, if I go, and one of the cool things is, if I just touch, so let's say, if I have volume going on and, my last touched parameter by default will automatically show up first. So if I wanted to remove that automation, one is I could just have that automation not play. I could have, if I wanted to just come right over here, we could say, okay, let's take that. If I right click here, we could say select all events, and then I could just delete. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to do, is just to delete like one level of automation, but whatever the last parameter was in 15, that last touch parameter will always show up on top. So if I'm automating like fine tuning, so if that is automated, so I come here, you can see that the fine tune is now the top parameter. So let me know if I'm misunderstanding that. All right, wonderful to see Gareth on from Spain, Bilbao. All right, so see Vince saying he's back in his studio today at home. So. All right, so we see Vince going to be moving into a nicer apartment at the end of March. Congratulations. It's always exciting. All right, so we have a question from Steven285. Hi, Greg. Can you show how MIDI remote controls for DAW integration are stored differently from plug-in controls? Do you need multiple pages, or will the window focus auto switch the hardware control? Okay, so one of the cool things that you have when we're working with like of quick control, so let's say if I'm with the MIDI remote. All right, so how to store differently from plug-in controls. All right, so one of the things that we have in the MIDI remote is a concept of like focus quick controls. Okay, so now focus quick controls, so like I have these 8 parameters here are focus quick controls. And focus quick controls dynamically change depending upon what is the actively selected part. So if I come over here and I have a track selected, my first, I could have my track quick controls automatically set up, but let's say on this I wanted to have let's say a squasher dynamics plugin on my kick. So I want to come right over here. So now when I have this particular plugin in focus, my quick controls are automatically controlling kind of the 8 defined parameters. Now these 8 defined parameters, if we click on any plugin with the quick in the upper right hand corner where we see QC, we could adjust these parameters for anything that you want to control in the plugin. So let's say I want this to be my down, I want my second one to be or I want this very last parameter to adjust let's say our mix percentage. So I could kind of right click here and let's go, if we have this L open, I could adjust the parameter here. And now my first quick control is adjusting kind of the mix percentage. So we could reassign these particular functions for every plugin. So let's say I had my VST bass amp on my bass track. All right, so I come over here. We had the VST bass amp. So since there's 8, it'll take the first 8 plugin parameters. So now when my bass amp is the active plugin, the bass amp is automatically adjusting here. When I go to my squasher plugin, and this is the active plugin, my quick controls are adjusting all of the parameters directly here. So I could just say, okay, so whatever kind of, device, whatever is the active window, my quick controls will automatically adapt to focus and control kind of the 8 parameters on the particular plugin window. And if you need to modify what particular parameters each plugin control is doing, you could change that by clicking on the QC in the upper right hand corner of the plugin, and you could remap those. And if you have, again, multiple pages, you could just say, you could get the default plugins from the page. You could, get rid of all these. And again, you could set up, if you go to the remote control editor, however many parameters the plugin has, it's not going to be limited to 8. And then you could switch between different kind of parameter banks as well. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Stephen. All right, so we see from Alex says, hi Greg, thanks for arranging to have David Kahn on the last Zoom talk. Really very special. So yeah, David's one of my favorite people. So he's like really insightful and just great perspective. All right, so we see Daniela joining from Germany. All right, we see Brian Sawyer joining from Yuma, Arizona. We see Recyclop joining from Finland. All right, so we see from SysGUI, is there a way to have auto crossfades happen when editing audio? Also during slip editing, it crossfades at the anchored clip endpoints. So generally when we have 2 events that are overlapping, so let's say if we take these 2 events here, there isn't an automatic crossfade. We see that in some more mastering programs, but if I wanted to do a quick crossfade, I could just simply instantiate the crossfade by hitting the letter X. So even if the events are kind of next to each other, not overlapping, I could hit the X key and automatically just instantiate the crossfade there. One of the things that you don't see, or it's not really an editable thing, but sometimes people will just have crossfades so that if you have an edit that doesn't occur at a 0 crossing point, so if you have to do an edit right here, you may hear a little click or pop. One of the things that you could do, if you actually need to have the crossfades, or if you're just having the crossfades for audible, so that you don't have an audible click at an edit point. And that's if that is the case, and what you could do is just simply come over here, and on a track is you could just have auto crossfades or auto fade in and fade out, so that if these 2 events are, without, if I didn't do a crossfade, and we may hear kind of a click because we're not doing any edit at the 0 crossing, this will actually do a kind of a playback, fade in, fade out, and playback crossfade if it's just simply enabled on the particular track. So this way you could just have, and you could, change if you wanted a different default fade in or a different default crossfade, you could adjust those, but this will just play back fade ins and fade outs to mitigate the problems of hearing a click or pop if you were perhaps not diligent about, or you couldn't pull off an edit at the 0 crossing point. So if you want kind of automatic crossfades, you could just simply enable this directly from the inspector window. All right, so we see from Rolling Stop says spot on, Greg. As usual, you got it in one. I didn't realize that auto quantize on. It's not something I've ever used until now. That is. Many thanks for sorting it out for me. Glad it was a one mouse click away from happiness. All right, so we have Ed Pacheco joining from Massachusetts. Thanks for being on today, part of the community. We see John Barry from the Riviera Coast in England. Great to see you on. All right. We see Razel Zamini joining from Denmark. All right. We see Jazz Dude with a link to Nuendo 14 sales promotion. We'll be seeing probably precursor to Nuendo 15 coming out. So if you haven't upgraded to 14. All right. Da Vinci Girl says, is there a complex microphone recording of an orchestra tool, a tool in old-fashioned style sound engineering, like a phase shifter? And yes, can you demonstrate, please, workflow old sound engineers use? So a lot of times if you're doing kind of, let's say, a multi-track recording, people may, record, and, may just record like a hand clap of the microphone, and capture it in all of the sources. So if we had a clap that was in all of the microphones here, we could actually, and what people would often do in kind of the old days is make sure that, like the classic Glyn Johns drum recording technique where you use like a kick drum mic, one mic over the snare and one mic over the kind of the right shoulder of the drummer. Now, to make sure that the phase was correct between the two mics, the snare mic, the overhead snare, and the right shoulder mic of the drummer, often the drummer would just hold two drumsticks one on top of each other. And that way they know, okay, this is 32 inches or whatever. And put the mic there, hold three drumsticks, and then with that same distance, that measurement, or use a tape measure, and just kind of make sure that the distance between the two microphones is going to be the same from like the snare drum, so that those two aren't out of phase. Now, what a lot of people would do, and that was like when we could, before we could actually see phase visually in the recording. So if we're actually looking at, if we're doing like a classical recording and we wanted to make sure that, items were in phase, because probably you're going to have microphones at different positions to capture different parts of the room. So you may have close mics, you may have other mics. So you may just, come over and let's say if we were recording something here, like in this case, we could see that our microphones on our kick drum, we have three microphones on a kick drum, are going to be relatively in phase. Now, if I looked at a particular track, and let's say if we invert it to phase, and we are now to listen to our kick drums. So, because this one kick drum is going to be, and then if I invert to phase, so just kind of looking visually at the waveforms here, you could just simply come right over here and choose to invert to phase, because if this microphone is going down in the amplitude, while this one is going up in the opposite direction. So when we invert the phase, or the polarity, to be more technically correct, we could see that the particular waveforms, we want these to all be kind of when one is going up in the waveform, the other is going to be going down. So in kind of classical engineering of years past, they would just simply come right over here and, and pretty much their trick was to use, a phase on-off switch if it sounded bad. Now, when people use a Decca tree, which is kind of like a stand that has multiple microphones on it, those microphones are positioned so that those microphones are within phase of each other. So, why you often see like a Decca tree mic, and I think it was from Decca Recording Studios in England, was because that was a system that allowed all of the microphones to be put on the stand and to be in phase. In contemporary recording, so a lot of people would do that and know that when they put the mics there, that if the phase was set the same way during the recording, that they weren't going to have a lot of phase issues. If they did have phase issues with like close mics, like spot mics, then they would probably just flip the phase. That would be the typical kind of workflow. If they heard a big difference, like while they're doing it, they may just reposition the microphones so that they don't hear the phase difference between the two. But now that we're in a digital audio workstation, we could see a visual representation of the polarity of the audio files. It's really easy to just simply shift tracks earlier or later in time slightly. We could also if you wanted to, change the start position of the track, you could also have track delays, so you could move tracks down to 1/100th of a millisecond if you needed to, so you could just kind of listen to it and check the phase relationship between different stages of microphones if needed. All right. We see Val joining from Vienna. Thanks for being online with us. All right. He says it's joining from a sunny and warm Vienna. No need for jackets anymore. So it says last week it was snow, minus 15 degrees, and today it's plus 15. All right, Steve Green just says, hi, Greg, I have a percussion 224 triangles. Is there a way of altering the pitch / double click on the sample in VariAudio, and cannot edit VariAudio segment detected messages? Any thoughts? What you can do with any audio file, so, the VariAudio is really kind of intended for working, with vocals and vocal ranges. So let's say if I wanted to take my bass performance here and I wanted to adjust the particular gain, if you select the event, you can come right over here, and then without having to go to VariAudio, you can see Transpose in the info line. So let's say I want this to be elastic pitch. So let's say I want to, so that's an octave higher. So let's go back to our original pitch. So just select the event, and if you want to do it by semitones, or you could do cents, which would be 100 cents per semitone using the fine tune. So if we go back to the original pitch. So just if you need to, transpose the pitch on like your triangles, just simply come right over here and just use the transpose, and that will actually just, do real-time transposition of your audio without having to utilize VariAudio. All right, so we see from FlyV, he says, what might I be doing wrong with my audio interface and mic? I'm only getting sound on one side of my headphones. I just remapped my audio connections as well. One thing is, see if you are, I don't remember your audio interface that you're using off the top of my head. On any time that you have a particular track, you may see this like one little circle. So it could be maybe that you are recording a mono source. When you go to add the track, you could say, okay, make sure that if you're recording like a microphone, if it's just going to be one particular microphone, you could record it in mono. So if you record it in stereo, you may get a waveform where you only see the waveform in the left or right channel, depending on which connection that you're using. Check your audio connections to your inputs and make sure that your inputs are defined as expected. So if you're recording stereo, let's say if we add a stereo bus, make sure that, that both of these input routings are set kind of as expected, so that we could, if these are kind of remapped to different inputs or outputs, then that could cause that as well. But make sure that when you're recording that it is a mono track, because if you recorded a stereo track with only a mono input, then it could only be in one particular channel, since that's where the connection for the microphone is going into. All right, great to see Michael Teams joining from Weatherford, Texas. Great to see you on. Great to see you on the Zoom social as well. All right, so we have NLG Composer joining us from South Carolina. Thanks for being online, part of the community today. Just curious what part of South Carolina you're in. Hilton Head on vacation a couple years ago. All right, we see Cubase Index joining, apologizing for being late. So, yeah, just a quick reminder, next week in the United States, we will be going through daylight savings time. So I think I may be an hour off with European countries and maybe Australia and other countries. So just be aware that next week, check the times on the link that's posted on the YouTube channel. It may be 1 hour off because in the United States, I'm not sure when other countries are changing times. Our clocks are changing this upcoming weekend. So just a quick heads up with that. All right, Uno Mementos received 1 gallon of chocolate marshmallow ice cream from Michael Teams. See Matt Elston joining. Great to have you on. All right, so we see from Papa Vol says, in Halion, there's the media browser that can be narrowed down to samples, can also be narrowed down to attributes like bass or vocal samples only. Yep, so we'll just come over here. All right, so when we come over here, we could just say, okay, I'm looking for, and then you'll see different categories. So like here, if you wanted to, look for if they've been categorized, I'm looking for bass, I'm looking for acoustic bass sounds. When we go over to like the browser, so let's say, okay, we go to VST sound here. We have other content. So let's say now that we're here, you could always, let's come over to, we can see all files. So we can say, okay, let's show samples. Just find something that has some samples in it. And some of them may be kind of locked. Let me just go to this computer. Let's go to All right, so I want to look in this folder for audio. All right, so now we can say our samples, and then if we want, let's see if we go to musical. So here we could actually kind of check like different, at this point I could just say, okay, I'm looking for bass, I'm looking for kick, and let's say if we come over here, let's say if we want to go to musical, we could say, okay, what character do we want? So you could add kind of different criteria for your samples if they have the different criteria here. So, what signature, what style, subcategory, bars and beats. So you could kind of look, for different categories to search for directly within Media Bay as well. So if most of it for audio files may be just kind of searching by name, which you could do quite easily. So, and if you have the other metadata there, a lot of people don't take time to do that. You could search based on the existing metadata in the media browser. All right, so you see from Vince, just says my mic is mono, I believe. Yeah, so make sure that you're actually recording like a mono on a mono track as well. So, Memento wants people to whack the like button. All right, Michael Teams is granted Jan 1 gallon of peanut butter crunch ice cream. All right, so we see Val just says, I currently got a lo-fi garage rock project on the table, and my idea was to make the drums like a one mic technique recording or max 2 mics. How can I simulate that with Groove Agent SC kit? All right, so let's take a look. So let's take a really great high fidelity kit and make it sound kind of low fidelity. We'll use one of the new kits that comes with the full Groove Agent 6. Let's say we'll do our punch kit. Okay, so let's say we have like all right, so if I wanted to just make this kind of lo-fi, so let's go ahead to the mixer here. Alright, seems like we should be hearing. Let me just. Okay, so let's go to the mixer here. And let's say I want to go to the kit mixer here. Alright, so let's listen to just a room. All right, so now all we're hearing is the room mics. And then let's see if we could put some plugins. I'm going to click on the effects tab here. So kind of playing around, that could be a pretty good lo-fi sound. And if we wanted to listen to kind of the full fidelity, so just maybe take the room mics. And then if you even wanted to do some like other stock plugins on it, check out kind of a classic grungealizer. So let's say we'll take some of the So we take that off and unsolo the room mics. So run a nasty EQ on just the room mics and that should get you some pretty convincing lo-fi drums. Seasoned taste. All right, so we see Jan from Stockholm giving kudos to Jazz Dude for the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. All right, NLG Composer says I have a fader for mapped for track 1 that I want to stay there no matter what track I have selected. It works perfectly unless I select a track over 128. My mapping jumps to 129 instead of 1. All right, so when we have, let's say, our MIDI remote, we could use different banks. So if I'm here, let's, if we have a number of audio tracks, okay, so now when I go to, let's say we want to go to our mixer, we could see like which tracks. So I have 8 faders in my control surface, and now as I want to bank over, we could just select like another 8 banks of tracks. So now fader 1 is controlling the volume of, let's say, channel 1. Let me just hide my inputs. And then when I hit the bank button, we're now controlling channel 9. But if I want that to always be fixed for like this one fader to always be fixed to track 1, all you have to do is, instead of using like the, when you go to the MIDI remote, so what I want to do is I'm just going to go, we'll open up the channel, and I will right click, and we'll just say MIDI remote pickup for remote mapping volume. So now I move fader 1, and now when I come over here, that's always going to be tied to fader 1. So if I select channel 9, right, we can see that my bank has changed, but my mix console doesn't control channel fader channel 9. It's still controlling audio 01. So to always maintain a particular, like this fader is always this channel, like my volume, or this is always going to be music, this is always going to be samples or whatever, just go to the particular track, right click, and now I'll say MIDI remote for mapping volume. I move fader 2. So now, regardless of where my bank is set to, I don't have to worry about setting up banks of 128. Faders 1 and 2 will always control. Let me just make this so it's visible. So faders 1 and 2 are fixed to channels 1 and 2 here. So if I go to channel, let's say I bank over, and now I move channel 3. So I move fader 3. Fader 3 is banking. But so we see the fader here move, but 2 and 1 don't move the channel next to fader 3. So we're taking it and just assigning that to a particular track. So now I slide over. We see channels fader 1, fader 2. I move fader 3 because that's banked. That's going to be all the way over here. But 1 and 2 are fixed to those particular tracks. So again, just go to select this. Select like the fader that you want to control. Right click, MIDI remote, pick for mapping, move the fader that you want, and then just click apply mapping. And then that way it's not included with the banking group of faders. That particular fader is going to control a very particular channel that will be fixed regardless of the bank position. So let me know if that's helpful for you. I think you may have sent the same question in earlier via email. So. All right, keyboard guy says, hey Greg, can you recommend best method for monitoring side channels only in the control room, Cubase 15? Thank you very much. So let's say if we wanted to just monitor like the sides. All right, so let's come over here. Let's get back to this project. All right, so when we're dealing with mixing, we often have like the middle part and the sides as part of our panning spectrum. Just turn that down to kill.
Recall the day we first met.
So I'm just going to go to the inserts on my control room and let's go to the frequency EQ.
It was 7th grade in the school parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us home.
So now if I wanted to go to one of the EQs, so let's say if I wanted to do so let's say we'll switch this to mid side. And now if I come over here, so if we want to do like EQ, like just on the middle part of the panning spectrum. So now we're just hearing what's on the sides. So this would allow us to kind of EQ the sides. There isn't anything specifically native plugin wise that would just allow you to just do listen to just the sides. We could do that in Wavelab. I could show it in Wavelab real quick, where you could monitor like the mid side or just left and right channels. And you could have plugins for those. So let's come over. So here you could just say, okay, we want to just monitor the mid, or just the sides, or just right channel, or you can say mix to mono, or mix left minus right. So usually when you're doing this, it's more of a mastering context. So if you have Wavelab, you could just very easily switch kind of your monitoring source. So you hear a side channel. Just what's in the mid, or default stereo, mono, left minus right. So, but there isn't like an exact equivalent, but you could do different frequencies when using the frequency EQ. All right. All right, so we see Daniela just says, I found a useful external plugin called Matt RS Phase Shifters, a tool like this inside Cubase. All right, maybe that's for the with the side. So I think that there's other kind of freeware plugins, and maybe Hoffa has one. All right, so we see from Vince, just says, and how to add the name to a MIDI remote, like your Nano. So the Nano is kind of like when you go to make a MIDI remote, this is automatically, like when we go to set up a MIDI remote, we could give it a particular name. So when we come over here, like as you're making one, you could define a name for it. If it's for like the mapping pages, here, so if you go into the mapping assistant, here we could just say, okay, we want to add a new mapping page, and we'll call this 5E. So we could now have kind of a new mapping page, and you could just kind of add the name. So, but let me know which one it is, Vince. I'd be happy to clarify. All right, so you see Gareth is happy to see Michael Teams on. All right, so we see that we will be crossing over to 44,000 questions next week, probably. We usually average about 80 a session, so. In a second, my monitoring computer just shut off. Bear with me just a second. Just plugged it in. Make sure I didn't shut the live stream off with my monitor. Bear with me just a moment. I have one computer that I use for monitoring questions, and that launches a live stream. It wasn't plugged in. rebooting now. Right, hang on a second. Just seeing if my audio, let me see if it's, bear with me just a second. Let's see if we're, okay, I'm just just checking, make sure that our live stream is still okay. All right. Okay, so I think I'm okay. If sorry about that, my monitoring computer powered off in the middle of the live stream here. So I think I'm okay, but if maybe someone could just text me real quick, maybe Michael Teams, who could text me real quick, see if the audio is still going through. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, I'm just going to check one more time here. Let me find my spot. Okay. I may have missed a couple of questions. I'm just going to make sure. Okay, so I think we're back. Sorry about the interruption there. Let me just... My computer had shut off that I start the live stream from. All right, so you see DaVinci Girl just says, I guess orchestra is a bit different from metal stage band. So let's see if you I may have a quick orchestral example for a phase that I could show you. So let's say if we are here. All right. So here we have like different close and room mics. So let's say we want to check the relationship between like the pianos here. So let's say where we have those accented notes. So let's check the phase relationship here. All right. So if like my piano, let's say if these two mics were, the phase was inverted, so you can see that these are going roughly in the same direction. Now if we listen to the pianos, so when we kind of flip the polarity on the back mics, hear how the kind of the sound stage collapses when the distant mics are out of phase with the close mics. And then if we do the same for like the mics that are on so if I want to invert the polarity of this, we hear how the tone of the bass changes significantly. So that's just one of the channels with the polarity flipped, and you can hear out what a difference in the tone it makes for the classical recording. All right, sorry if I missed a few questions and well, my computer had shut down. Sorry about that. All right, so you see from Val, it says regarding my one mic technique, my plan was maybe send them all into a room in different positions and somehow place a mic virtually. So I really get out one mono signal that I could place. I don't know if that's possible. You know, an old trick that, you know, kind of a new old trick that people often do. My friend Clarence J, who's kind of like an award, I think he's a Grammy-winning songwriter, based in Nashville now, super smart guy. And I remember him telling me, like, one of the things that he did in his session was he just, like, you know, he was looking for kind of a retro sound. I think it was like for a fashion commercial. And it was kind of, you know, a bit Mad Men, like the TV show Mad Men vibe to it. So what he did is he just played the sound through his speakers and put a mic up. And this is a common technique sometimes. My friend Gary Pachosa does this a lot, where he calls it a trash mic, and he just kind of puts some cheap mic in the room and capture the sound as well and blend that. And often he may use that to feed it into a delay. But you know, my friend Clarence was talking a project, and he was explaining his process at a NAMM show, maybe 2019. We're doing a seminar together, and he just played the sound in his control room and put a mic up in the back of the room and then blended that sound in. So don't be afraid to just, you know, put up, you know, and sometimes the cheaper the mic, the better, is just play the drums through the speakers and record a signal with one like cheap microphone in a room somewhere. And often it could be like somewhere not ideal at all, but in the back corner. And then you could blend that sound in, and then you kind of get like a movement of air being captured as well. Okay, Pablo is saying he likes the new punch kit. Says thanks, Craig. The room mic thing with some EQ will do it, I guess. Sorry. You see Val just says the mixer and groove agent is something I always forget about. It says Magneto 2 on 100%. Magneto is always a good anti-suck plugin. All right, Pablo says he loves new mixer and groove agent 6. Pablo just says all drummers are allowed to use Groove Agent 6 instead. All right, Roland Stuff asks, hi Greg, since upgrading Cubase 15 a while ago, there's about a 3-second pause between pressing the start key on the computer keyboard and recording starting. Any ideas, please? So make sure that, it could be, just out of curiosity, if you come over here, try going to, like if you've done a VST Connect session with kind of latency that high, I would see if, like in the control room, try coming over here, and if you see like VST Connect monitor, see if, and if you go into the Q mix, try to see if in your cues or the monitors that you have maybe like a VST Connect session. So sometimes, usually when it's that high, when you hit play, maybe it's still sending out like to VST Connect. And if it's not really going anywhere, it could be waiting for kind of a return signal and then eventually gives up. So see if you go to like your VST Connect SE, and if you choose to remove VST Connect, or if you see it in the plugins, so in the control room. So if you come to the control room area and then go to the inserts, see if you have any VST Connect plugins in here that could be causing latency as well. All right, so we see Raw Justice Hip Hop checking in from across the river for me in Capitol Heights, Maryland. Thanks for joining us today. All right, Gareth says that Pablo is now sacked because of Groove Agent 6. So, all right, so we see from Flyv that he's got his mic all fixed up. So thanks for letting us know. All right, so we see from Keyboard Guy says regarding side-only monitoring in control room, basically any plugin that could do mono and phase reverse, these seems to do. All right. And Val's just recommending that MS mid-side equalizing is good for contemporary pop, modern hip-hop, pop, and EDM. All right, so we see regarding Wavelab, I'm noticing that it's not saving the plugins from the master output of my audio setups. I have the option to load the last chain on each restart disabled. All right, so I think, so let me go ahead and I'll just test it, but like those plugins that we saw in Wavelab were automatically loaded up from the last live stream when we opened up Wavelab. So maybe if you take that preference off, so we'll come over here and open up Wavelab. So let's go to this, and so let's put a master rig in. Load up a quick. All right, so let's say come over here. All right, so we have that Greg Lucan's preset. So let me go ahead and close Wavelab, and I'll open it again. We'll see if the master section is preserved. All right, I'll just do one more plugin. So let's say we'll do Black Valve. Okay, so let's exit out of Wavelab. And we'll see if those two plugins are loaded automatically. Yep, so we see the master rig here with the Greg Lukens preset, stereo acoustic guitar, and our black valve are automatically preserved for us. All right, and the next question we have from Pablo, I think it's on Wavelab. How can I select a track and create a title marker using a keyboard command? So, there's different markers that could be inserted. So I'm not sure if you want it to, I want to select everything. So if we wanted to insert, title. So let's see if we just hit the C key. So it looks like that automatically adds the title marker. So if we want to create the title from the selection there. So let me know. So I think just hitting the C key would do it, Pablo. All right, so we have Sounds Like Matt joining from Chicago. I used to rep Chicago way back when in the day. Lots of good times there. Thanks for joining us, being part of the community. All right, so we see from DaVinci Girl, it says, no, there are no other plugins for this specific orchestra use. Say you have 30 to 50 microphones to record in an orchestra hall or do live broadcasting in short time for a mastering setup between the acts, then it's a great helper. So I would always, make sure, if I was doing that, then I would do test recordings and test the phase relationship between the test recordings. You could obviously invert the phase on input if needed, if the microphones can't be adjusted. But I think in most kind of large classical scenarios that I've been involved with and have witnessed, most of the engineers are very cognizant of the phase relationships and, we'll pull out measuring tapes to make sure that the microphones are equidistant between sources and use kind of known sources like decatrees. And if you wanted to use spot mics, they would just do like a quick test recording and, try to get within the same amount of distance, between the different musicians so that, they're always going to be 18 inches away from the music stand, and they use kind of the music stand as a barometer as well. All right, so we see from Sounds Like Matt, is there a recommendation from Cubase or just Greg on where to install/store project files versus recorded audio MIDI versus libraries? So it really depends on your scenario. So like in my studio, I have 2 drives that are dedicated for like virtual instrument libraries. I have 3 terabytes. So I had a 1 terabyte drive that was getting full, so I got a 2 terabyte NVMe drive, so I have 3 terabytes, so I keep all of my samples on that, and that's kind of independent of, that's going to be independent of the system drive. So if the system drive failed, I could just take those 2 NVMe drives and put it into a new computer and have access to all the samples. On that system, I also have a dedicated drive for audio, and this is probably because I've been doing this for a long time. When we wanted to separate audio files from samples, just for bandwidth purposes, I don't think it's really an issue unless you're doing super large projects now, like everything you see me do on the live stream is going to be from a single laptop drive, like a 2 terabyte drive. So, but just always make sure that you know where all of your files are. That's the most important thing. And for every project, when you're starting a new project, put every project into a unique folder. So when you come over here, let's say we want to create empty, Don't put multiple projects into one folder. Have every song in a unique project, and that will save you lots of headache later down the road, so that when you go to back up a folder, all the files that are needed for a particular project are stored within that one folder. So if you're kind of careful with your file management, most of the programs, you could dynamically link to like sample content on a different drive pretty easily. But, make sure that, like each project that you do is in its own unique folder, so that you could back up one folder and all the files associated with that project will be included in one folder. That's what I would do. All right, so we see from NLG Composer, says faders work perfectly now. Thank you. Thanks for the question and joining the live stream today. Just curious what part of South Carolina you're in. Just always helps me kind of make a mental image for attendees. All right, Jazz Dude's raising a good point about classical recording. So how did Deutsche Grammophon record so many famous records with all analog and no plugins? To Daniela's comments. All right, so my chat field jumped. All right, so we see from Sounds Like Matt, it says, I have a secondary drive that I would put some onto, but my boot drive is, for now at least, plenty large, as fast as I wonder if it might be a non-issue. Also wondering about recommendations with the drive. So, with drives, always make sure that you have a good amount of free space as a buffer. So I have a system drive. I have one drive for audio, one drive for... and two drives again for sample library content. At one point, 20 years ago, I had to drive for video when I was doing a lot of video work, because the drives were slower, and being able to kind of spread it across multiple drives worked well. It's not as critical today, I think, but make sure that you have just enough drive space as a buffer. You'll notice that your whole computer will start to work a little slower when there's not as much space for all the content to be streamed from. Okay. All right, so there's the discussion about the orchestral recording with phase. And I just ask if such tools inside. I just buy the Matt's phase shifter. So generally, I wouldn't buy a phase shifter. It's probably not the intended use for kind of classical problems. So. All right. Okay, reading through comments. All right, you see Pablo just saying Master Rig 2 will be the only plugin I use for the next mastering sessions. Wavelab is El Rey. So I believe that's the king. Gareth is saying you could also use the music stand as a weapon of persuasion or defense. Okay, Jackie Barr says, is there a way to horizontally scroll the menu that has the tools, etc.? Mine is filling up the screen, but I need to see things that I've scooted off the screen and can't unless unchecking things. So there could be similar. So if you can't see kind of the tools at the top, always kind of right mouse clicking will give you the tools. There's also, if a preference, so you can see kind of the tools here. So, when in doubt, I always just kind of right mouse click, and this is me running Cubase for 34 years, where, before any company really implemented a right mouse click, Steinberg was very kind of forward thinking. It'd be, if all my tools are always accessible just from a right mouse click. Now, some of the functions, you could also, when you see three dots, like we see three dots here, we can expand or collapse to reveal more parameters when needed. So, if it's stuff like, okay, maybe I just always do undo, redo from keyboard shortcuts. I don't need to necessarily come up and have that. So we could just kind of right click and choose different states, but when in doubt, always right mouse click anywhere in the project window, and your tools are always accessible. I usually only go here. I don't think I would access my tools here other than for demonstration purposes, like when I'm teaching people this is what this tool does, so that as I'm showing it, it's just the tools don't magically appear, but just I got into the habit, and I think it's a good habit to get into, of always accessing the tools just from the right mouse click. So if you're not doing that and you're switching tools here, you probably could be more judicious and more efficient with your use of switching tools kind of directly here. All right. All right, so we see a question from Raw Justice Hip Hop. Says, hi Greg, I know you can use Wavelab from inside Cubase. Can you give me an example of a workflow where that would be useful? All right, so let's say I have a stereo track. Okay, so I'll just take these two tracks here, and I will make a stereo. I'll just convert these to a stereo track. All right, so let's say I have a stereo track, but and I didn't want to necessarily convert it. Let's say I have to do editing just on the right channel. So if I'm here in Wavelab, what I could do is take this particular track and say, let's come over to my extensions. Let's tell it to now when we double click, that's going to launch Wavelab. Okay, so now we launched Wavelab. So I want to take just this particular channel, and let's add We'll come over here. Let's go to gain, and we'll add 3 dB of gain. Or I want to come over here, let's say, so I could adjust the gain there. Let's say I have this particular file and we're listening to it. I want to just take the piano here. And now I want to go to my left, I want to go to my mid side, and I want the sides to be louder. So I'm going to go to my gain, and let's make the sides 6 dB louder. So now when we listen to it, so I could just edit just the left right, or I could edit just the mid side. And if I wanted to, you know, just come over here and delete my sides, I could just say, okay, now. So we'll hear the piano kind of collapse here. So you can hear the piano. So you could do editing on, you know, just an individual channel very easily, or just like if we want to do just like the left, right, you know, or the mid side, you could also just come over here and be able to see, like, you know, rainbow. So you could actually find sibilant frequencies if you have that in your recording. So stuff like that is helpful to be able to take it into Wavelab and be able to do additional edits there. So those are a couple of things that you could do. Okay. All right, Dalbsky just asks, hi Greg, how to change the volume at all tracks when you have automated it? Okay. Okay, so let's say we're going to automate kind of all of our drums here. Or I'll just open up a different example here. All right, let me just, I have an example kind of set up for this. All right, so let's say we have all right, so let's say we look at this and we're going to have, if we go to our mix console, we have all of our drums are kind of automated here. So I have lots of automation going on in my drums. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to take all of my drums and we're going to assign all of my drums to a VCA. So I'm going to right click, let's add a VCA to the selected channels. So now if I wanted to just take my VCA, I could bring all my drum channels down. And we can see that their automation is still intact. And this is really helpful, like if we go to our snare track, and let's say I have reverb. Okay. So now if I bring down my VCA, it doesn't sum it. So I could actually automate the VCA. So as we're here, I could bring down my VCA fader, and the tracks that are automated upward are still automated, and we don't really affect the gain structure going to our send effects. So now when I come here, so I move my VCA fader up, and some tracks will be going in contrary motion, automation-wise. Now, as I do this, we look at the tracks. We can see that when we open up our automation, that we have kind of the written automation as well as the automation that is the result of the VCA fader. So if I go to the VCA fader here, we could actually just say, let's combine the automation of the VCA and the linked channel. And now we could take the result of the VCA automation and we could attenuate or adjust the existing automation data. So assign all of the tracks to a VCA fader, and then you could automate the VCA. Your existing automation is intact. You don't have to necessarily convert it to kind of coalesce the result of the VCA fader coupled with the original automation. You can if you want to, but that's what I would do. So select all your tracks and then right click, add a VCA fader to the selected track, and then you could drop the volume of all those and not affect their existing automation contours. All right, so we see from Pablo, it just says it works, Craig, with 3 exclamation points. All right, DaVinci Girl asks, another question, Greg, if I buy Cubase Upgrade, can I use the plugins with my version 9 I use on Windows 7 PC? There may be some plugins that aren't going to be working in Windows 11 from Windows 7. Generally, all of the stock plugins will work. Most of the plugins should work. You may have to enable VST2 plugin support. But you know, if the plugin itself will never install or never ever run on Windows 10 or Windows 11, it's not going to work. As long as a plugin will function, you know, in the later operating systems, then you'll be in good shape. Right. Jazzy is just making a great point that microphone positioning is done by engineers who know exactly what happens with the acoustics in the room, pre-delay reflections, different surfaces, time differences, polarities, interference, and tons of other things. There's a reason that once people know, like, you know, where to set the instruments in the studio, that they tend to use the same spot, and they have tape set up for where the piano mics go, where the piano sounds best, where the drums sound best. So. Great. All right, so we have Balsa joining from Montenegro. Thanks for being part of the live stream today. All right, so Pablo is asking, can the gain range be changed in Master Rig 2? I think 20 dB is excessive for mastering EQ. I ordered it a while ago. I like Master Rig, even the first version for Cubase 16. So I think that, you know, let's see if it could be changed. We'll take a look at it. Not sure if it could be changed, but Pablo says he likes the master rig for Cubase 16. All right, so it looks like we have 15 dB. And this is with EQA. Let me try some of the dynamic EQs. It looks like 15 dB. All right, and these are kind of matching the Poltech, which is 10 dB. So let's try the P1A. So it's 10 dB. So it looks like most of the EQs are 15 dB. So let me know if it's a specific EQ, Pablo, that you're seeing at 20. All right. And see more comments kind of on the concept of classical recordings. I remember, when I was in college, I got to perform with Robert Shaw, who's like an amazing conductor. I think he had like 23 Grammys. He was conductor or director of Atlanta Symphony and the Robert Shaw Chorale. And I remember talking to him about Telarc recordings. I asked a lot of questions on Telarc recordings, and he was incredibly nice to me when I was in college. And he said, like, their absolute best recordings were just a stereo mic. And one of the tricks that they would do is to take the entire concert hall and cover and put plywood sheets over every single seat. So every seat was covered in plywood to make the room more reverberant. But he always said that the best recordings that were ever captured of his work, which was a lot, was just a single stereo mic setup. All right. So we see from Michael Teams. It says, Greg, I've noticed that on my stereo keyboard tracks that one side is definitely quieter than the other. What could be done to remedy this issue? So make sure, like I have a friend that did a whole recording, and I think the engineer may have like taken the monitors. They may have been set to different volume levels, and he kind of adjusted it. I'll just kind of show the result of it. So if your audio file tends to look like when we look at the waveform here, this one may not be as obvious. I may have corrected some of it. Let me see if I have another one. But here, yeah, you could definitely see how the right channel is, or the left channel is has more amplitude than the right channel. And this is because I think the engineer actually had his speakers, one volume turned up louder than the others, so it sounded balanced in his control room. Make sure that when you're feeding it, that there's no like pad on the input of your audio interface. I think you're running a Focusrite interface. Make sure there's no pad, that the high Z switch isn't set on one of the channels. Make sure that, both channels, and if you even feed a test tone signal in. So let's say if we come over, a great way to test this is just to come over to an audio track, and we could send this out to output 7 and 8 on your audio interface. We'll make it a stereo track. Bus this out of output 7 and 8, but put a test tone generator on it so that we know exactly. So let's say if we get to our inserts, and this is why we make test tone generators under the tools. So you'll see that we can say, okay, I want this at -6 dB. So now when you record, bus this out to output 7 and 8, take that connection and feed it into inputs, and you could see if this is actually, so this is going to be sending out the same exact level. So see if when you capture it, if the inputs are being captured correctly straight from the audio interface. If it's being captured there, then make sure that there's no panning set on the keyboard itself. Check the cables on the keyboard. Make sure you don't have one dodgy cable, one cable that you've had in your rig for 30 years and one cheeseball Radio Shack cable on one channel. But, check, take the test tone and feed that out of outputs, and just take an analog connection with the cables that you're using for the keyboard and see if you get the result here. And then just, this will sound kind of just like a quick test tone. And when you record this, it'll be really evident if there's differences in level between the left and right channel. So if you do the recording here, out of 7 and 8 of your interface and captured into inputs 1 and 2, inputs 3 and 4, inputs 5 and 6, inputs 7 and 8, see if you get similar results, to make sure that there's no kind of gain discrepancy on the input stage of your interface. So if you do this and you see the left or right channel is down, then it's going to be maybe something that you need to adjust in the mixer, the input gain of your audio interface. If this prints fine and then the keyboard is still not printing as expected, then I would check the cables of the keyboard that you're trying to capture the sound of and see if that makes a difference for you. But that should take out some variables where you could find out. All right, so we see from Marcus Ervin, 740 says, the DAW looks gorgeous. Yeah, I think the team's done a great job with the user interface. Okay. We see from Birwav, it says, edit active part only, and Cubase is great, but it's not perfect. Any suggestions to fully lock other MIDI events to see them as ghosts and only edit the selected one? I think, it's always could be kind of an interesting scenario. So let's say if we come over here, we could say, let's go to an instrument track here. Let's add 2. right, so we'll come over here. Let's just add. Here, let me just. All right, so let's say we have this, and let's duplicate the track. All right, so let's say let me just change a color here so it's a little more clear. Okay, so let's say we're now editing both of these events. Okay. So, and, the problem often gets to be like when we switch and we click on another one that we select the active voice. So let me just see if we could. All right, so now if we come over here, we could just, choose to not see those particular ones. But let's say if we come over here to this track, and let's say if we lock that particular track, and now we're over here. Let's see if that prevents us from. Yeah, I guess locking the track will automatically. You just have to be, I always would kind of choose the colors to be, a little more obvious between them. But, the concept, is always tricky because we can come over here and select kind of our different events. Let me just colorize these by part. So as we look at particular events that we want to be able to kind of switch back and forth, and sometimes it's more, and if the voices are overlapping, you could kind of go back and forth. I'll mention it again. I see the ability, like the desire to have like an object here where all the other ones are just visual and can't be edited. But if we do, this way we can just quickly switch between our different events and edit them, and you could kind of choose, to go to the next event. But I agree it's probably not a perfect solution, but I'm not sure if a perfect solution exists for you to go back and forth easily between two different parts. Seeing comments from Da Vinci Girl about Budapest Orchestra. So in the U.S., it's also known as being a lot less expensive to record there, not necessarily for their darker sound. Okay, reading through comments. We see Graham Witcher on. Great to see you on the Zoom social on Friday. He's received 1 gallon of chocolate marshmallow swirl ice cream from Michael Teams. All right, so we see from DaVinci Girl, I just need to run the plugin once, and I could use the stock plugins once. Is there something inside the update in the preferences I could decide to never to use VST3 plugins? So there isn't a block VST3 plugins because that would be, I don't think many people would want that. But if we go to your VST plugin manager, you can make a new collection. So if you come over here, we can say, okay, I want to make an empty collection. We'll call it DaVinci Girl. And then if you want to just have one plugin available, you could just have one VST2 plugin available, and you don't have to have all of the other plugins. So you can make a VST plugin collection and just simply go back and forth and see only the plugins that you want to and customize it exactly for the plugins you want to see there. But there isn't a hide all VST3 plugins function. So Gareth calling Graham Witcher the Peter Grant of Hot Mess. All right. All right, so we see Gerald Ely joining from California. Thanks for joining us. All right, Gerald Ely says, question for Greg in the community. Should a vocal be recorded in mono or stereo? Why? So I would say generally, most of the time, capture it as what the source is. So if you're recording a vocal, generally you're using one microphone. So that would be a mono source. So I would record that to a mono track. If we are recording, like I did a recording project, a singer friend of mine, she was in kind of like an Andrews Sisters type group, where they did like really tight three-part harmonies, and like Andrews Sisters, like an American female singing group from the 40s, an American group. And for that, I had a Rode stereo mic, and I just put that up like, a few feet above their head, and that was perfect. Because I didn't need to, they knew how to mix themselves. So I just put a stereo mic up, and all 3 voices, were just perfect. They blended themselves as they were performing, and I could just capture one stereo recording of that. So where it can make a difference is when you have some people go, okay, what if I want to have like stereo effects on my track? So if we come over here, let's say, we could record it as a mono source and put it onto a stereo track. So let's say if I'm here and I have my guitar, and I'll just bypass some effects here. Okay, so let's say we listen to our guitar part. Now, since this is a mono track, if I put an insert, that insert would be mono too. So if I come over here to, let's say, my inserts, and I put a reverb on. So I'll come over here, let's put a little. So that reverb, since it's an insert on a mono track, that reverb would be mono, and a lot of people love that you could do that. But if I wanted this reverb to be in stereo, I could just come right over here to this guitar track, and we see it as 0, this like O. This is indicating that it's mono. Now when I make this a stereo track, we're going to hear the reverb really open up. now we have a mono source on a stereo track. If I come here, now the reverb's in mono. Now we have a mono track, but a mono source on a stereo track, and now its effects can be in stereo. So rule of thumb is, like if I'm recording a single vocalist, I will record them as mono. If I'm recording like multiple people for background vocals, I may do stereo for that. I think that's pretty much the standard rule of thumb. All right, so we see from Murin's Subasic, says, "Hey Greg, take those plugin tabs from Wavelab also to Cubase." So it's been in the Cubase surveys in the past. So I'll pass it along as a feature request as well. All right, so we see Pablo's going for dinner. He'll be back in a little bit. He's having his typical late Spanish dinner. Okay, reading through comment. Grim Witcher's requesting different flavors of ice cream song for next Hot Mess record. All right, so you see FlyV's got a new Logitech Bluetooth keyboard and mouse. We're really small for traveling, so that's good. Gareth is just saying underrated reverb with the Roomworks. All right, so we see from Chris Higginson, who asked, "Hi Greg, does the clip gain adjustment at the bottom left of an event affect the pre-gain level, or are they the same thing?" So they both allow you to add gain before the particular, before the channel, before the audio hits into the channel. So if we come here and we adjust the pre-gain, we could adjust that amount there, and we could also just, okay, this word is a little hot. We could adjust our pre-gain. So this will adjust the level before the signal hits the fader. When we go to the pre area, we also have a gain here, and this affects the gain before it hits the channel, but it is independent of these. So if we want to kind of, adjust it for the particular event, we have two different stages of pre-gain. So one could be kind of visual, and a lot of people use that kind of for editing purposes to kind of level out the different audio volume of different tracks. And we'll have the other one is going to be just kind of global on input stage. So some people may use the pre-gain here, and we could have up to 48 dB, I think 48.2 dB of gain here, but these would both kind of hit at the same point in the signal flow. This could be more dynamic where we have changes. This would generally be more global. You could automate it. Most people would choose not to, but if people are kind of gain staging a mix where they want, all of the levels to basically be at 0 dB. You may use this pre-gain to make the adjustment as well. So they're not linked, but they kind of both serve at the same point of the signal flow, but they're independent of each other. All right, so we see from Vince, it says, do separate input buses always have to be changed in audio connections to the one you're using? Why does the default input bus do? So, the input buses, so let's say if we come over here, we go to our audio connections and we go to our input tab, we can see that we have 18 inputs here. So I think this is going to be maybe like an MR816. So we have 18 potential inputs. Now we could route these inputs to whatever sources, whatever physical connections. So there's not a direct one-to-one relationship. So this input could be coming from input 1 could be coming from input 3, input 2 could be coming from input 1 physically. So there's no real correlation between those. Often if we add multiple input buses, that will sequentially kind of, increment them, but they don't, it just has to be, the input bus just has to be the one that the source is connected to that you want to capture. So if you have an audio interface with 24 inputs and you want to record a source that's plugged in and connected to input 17, at that point you just choose input 17. But it's really, you could remap input 1 to be coming from input 17 in your audio connection. So it's really kind of however you prefer, just so that you know what input source is going to be fed into a particular track. So let me know if that makes sense. And we see, what does the default input bus do? So like when you just add a track, if you don't want to do any mapping, like a lot of people may have a default input track. Like if you're a guitar player, it could be, okay, I'm recording all my guitar parts. So my default input is my microphone that's connected to my guitar amp, or my guitar processor is going in. So I have a Line 6 Helix, something along those lines, and I'm recording all of and I always want that as my first go-to input source. Then I would use that as my default source. Like most of the time when I'm actually recording on my studio computer, I'm recording my bass. So that input is set up for my default input, so that every time I don't have to go through and redefine that every single time I want to record my bass. See Gareth just saying both RoomWorks and Revelation, they just need a bit of proper learning to get the best out of them. All right. And Jazzy is saying they're very light on resources, audio performance resources. All right, so we see Gareth has to dash. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see John Koskinen says, hello, all working on mains wiring. Just want to say hi and thanks to Greg for the informative Zoom meetup. So it was great to see you on, John. And all the other people that joined us. And thanks for everyone's great questions to David Kahn. Okay. See, Jazz Dude says, thanks to the famous VST3 technology. Thank you, Steinberg. Yeah, it's amazing. It's been out for 18 years. So in America, it could vote. All right, so we see Val just saying VST3 is king. Will there be a VST4? So I'm sure, we've probably seen, maybe like 20 or 30 incremental versions of VST3. So, we already are kind of doing MIDI 2.0 stuff is already covered in VST3. And that was kind of early on from actually a lot of parts of VST3 were adopted for MIDI 2.0, for MPE and note expression work. And, so there's a lot of stuff that's, currently in VST3 that's underutilized by a lot of developers. So there's, great stuff that's available that still isn't being used by lots of different developers and are kind of missing out on a lot of great stuff. But I'm sure at some point there will be a VST4 and a VST5 in my lifetime. So, all right. So we see from Chris Higginson's just says regarding the pre-gain question, thanks. Answer couldn't be clearer. So, all right, and we see from Vince as a source you want to capture. Yes, great explanation. All right, so we see Recyclop. Is there a way to work on a single project with two computers? Need to edit recordings on another computer while studio is reserved for something else. So when you're working on, your Cubase license, since Cubase 12, you could run it on 3 different computers. So, if the logic is, okay, I could have a home studio computer, I could have a work studio computer, and I could have a laptop that kind of goes back and forth. So, if you're, recording your project and doing editing on, you could open up your project as long as you have the media files, as long as you have the files to open, there's no problem kind of bouncing projects back and forth. I was just doing it last night to help my son with the project. He had to kind of write a song and sequence it and record a bass part. So I was helping him with that. And, I did it in my computer, and then I was able to transfer it to his computer using just a little USB. I actually used like a micro SD card connected into a USB-C hub. So as long as you get the files back and forth, you could freely work. And if your plugins are similar in both setups, you could freely take your project back and forth between multiple computers. So, and it's pretty easy enough now with different cloud services. So if you save it to OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox, to get the files back and forth as well. All right, so we see from Roland Stuff says, hi Greg, thanks for your suggestion about VST Connect being the cause of my 3-second latency before record and metronome kick in, but I can't see any signs of this in my Cubase 15. I'm rather baffled. One thing you could also do is just come over, and when you go to like the lower left-hand corner of the transport, you could try to activate the constrained delay compensation. And if we turn this on in the bottom left-hand corner, and what that will do is kind of bypass plugins that are latent. Now, when we want to look at plugins, because the latency could be caused, by the buffer size of your audio interface and also plugins. So let's say I want to come over here. Let's hide my input channels. I could take kind of a larger project here. Let's take this one. All right, so plugins themselves can cause latency. One plugin, if you have a plugin in your project, if you have a lot of like vocal chains, for instance, vocal chain is a plugin that could cause latency. So let's take a look at how we could determine plugins and what our channel latency is in our project. So I'm going to open up my full screen mixer. And if we come over here, we could say, okay, let's go right click on one of the kind of tabs here, and we'll say set up sections. Now, one of the sections that we could have is called channel latency. Okay, so once channel latency is turned on here, we could see just above the fader here, anytime that we have plugins that cause latency. So let's say I go to my inserts and now I want to put a vocal chain on this track, and I want to put a vocal chain on another track. Okay, so now when we look at our latency of our particular track here, we can see, okay, we have on this particular track, we have the vocal chain introduces 236.3 milliseconds of delay. We could think of that delay as being almost like the plugin processing task. So some plugins that do a tremendous amount of looking ahead may have higher latencies. So look again when you come over here, go to your setup sections and then go to the channel latency. So let's say if I have like multiple plugins on, I have like 8 plugins on a particular track, and I'm like, oh, I see this big huge number. What's causing that latency? If you kind of just click right here, we can see exactly how much latency each plugin is causing. So right click and come over here to the setup sections and go to the channel latency and just kind of scroll through your project, and let me know if it does it with an empty project or if it's kind of with like one project with a lot of plugins is imposing a lot of latency. So as we come over here, we could just kind of scroll and you could see how much latency each plugin path is causing on every single track. And that could give you an idea of, okay, when we're working with this, these tracks, maybe I should just come over and, go to my constrained delay compensation. And what that will do is bypass plugins that have higher latency, so that as we're working and we're recording, that we can bypass those plugins to have a minimal amount of latency during the recording experience. So try, and you could also see kind of the channel latency. If we come over here, let's get to the setup sections, and we can see our latency figure here. So as we would go to, different plugins, we could see kind of what our latency is on particular tracks. So we can see, oh, this track has 236 milliseconds. So if you use 10 vocal chain plugins in your project, that would be 2.3 seconds of latency. So, and all these latencies can get added up and compounded and kind of become cumulative, so that when you hit play, it could take that amount of time for everything to actually kick in. So check your latency on your particular on your path to see if that makes a difference. You see Jazz Dude says that my son will be married when VST4 appears. That's probably a good point. Okay. See that Pablo is back from dinner. Thanks for joining us. All right, then we go to a couple of questions that were mailed in. All right, how to apply different plugin settings for different monitors in the control room. For instance, if I wanted to have different monitoring room correction plugin presets for different pairs of speakers that require different settings. Okay, so let's come over here. So let's say if we're switching between different speakers. So if we go to our audio connections to our control room tab, we could say, okay, I have my HS7s, NS10s, 2020 bass, and let's say another monitor. So as we want to come over here, if we have to have different, let's say like Sonar works, kind of where you do room correction, but you need different settings for HS7s versus NS10s versus 2020 bass. I think we could just come directly over to the Inserts tab, and when we go to, we can see our cues. Let's go to our monitor. And in the monitor path, here we could choose to have, let's say, we'll just show it as an EQ. So I come over here, we could now have our room correction for this monitor. When I switch to a different speaker, let's say to my NS10s, we could have a different instance of that room correction EQ. So that, let's say, okay, I want to take the mid-range, and I want to take this off, and I need to add bass. So this is my NS10. So when I switch to my HS7, I have different EQ settings, different room correction settings. So when you switch the speakers, you'll see the speaker reflected here as a tab. Go to the Inserts, and then you could run a separate instance of like Sonar works for this speaker, a different preset when you switch to different speakers. So a lot of people think that, you know, we could put it into just the main insert area here, but that insert, then we would have to load up presets every time we switch speakers, which is not ideal. It's kind of a first world problem. But as I switch speakers, we could just say, okay, now speaker A, when we go to the inserts, we could see that we're going to have, our separate room correction for every time that we switch different monitors. So that way my NS10s could have different room correction than my KRKs, than my JBLs, than my events. So that's how you could have different kind of room correction presets on different speakers without having to switch presets all the time. Okay, so we have a question mailed in. It says, the manual states that when moving regions to different locations on the timeline, pressing Control is used to constrain movement so that the regions do not shift vertically. This has been a major headache for me because when I press Control while moving regions, it does not constrain vertically at all. When moving large chunks of an arrangement, it's always complicated. It requires precision and patience. Am I missing something? All right, so let's take a look. All right, so what's critical when you do this is, so if I want to move this and have it in the same exact spot, vertically or horizontally. Now the trick to this is when, let's say I want to make a copy, I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key. All right, now I've moved it first vertically. Okay, so how we first move that event will be very critical. Okay, so let's say I have moved this event first vertically. All right, so I'm still have my left mouse button down. I move it over here. I hold down my Alt or Option so I can see that I'm copying the event. So I moved it vertically. Now I'm going to hold down Control or Command. And depending on how we moved it first, so I moved it vertically first here. Now when I hold down the Control or Command key, Now I can't move it in time. I can't move it horizontally. It's constraining my direction. So now if I move this event horizontally first, and then I come over here and I make a copy, but I want it to only be, since I've moved it horizontally, now when I hold down, so I'm holding down Alt or Option, now when I hold down Control or Command, now I'm restrained from moving it vertically. So depending on the direction of how you move something, so if I move this vertically first, and then let's say, okay, I want to make sure it's going to the same area. So I move this horizontally first. So just make sure that you move it kind of vertically or horizontally first. And the first direction that you move it is what direction will be restrained. So if I have like multiple units here, let's say I have these 2 units, let me just add another audio track. Okay, so I take these 2 tracks, I move it vertically first, and now I can't move it vertically once I hold down Control. Once I release Control, then I can move it freely anywhere. If I move like these 2 tracks, I move them horizontally first. I go to make a copy. I can move it up or down until I hold down my Command or Control key. Now I'm restrained from moving it horizontally or vertically because I moved it horizontally first. Then it's restricted to horizontal. If I move it vertically at first, then I can't move it horizontally. So the direction that you do the first movement while holding down, while moving the event will be what determines if it's kind of restrained from moving vertically. So if you move it vertically, then it's going to lock it in vertically. If you move it horizontally, then when you hold down Control or Command, it's going to lock it horizontally. All right, so we see, hi Greg, in Groove Agent SE previous versions, I could turn on the red select button as shown in the upper picture, and that would allow me to change the volumes independently for each highlighted sample as shown in the red lines. Now, no matter what I do, it always changes the volumes for each sample together, leaving the option to balance the volumes between the samples. Can you test and advise, please? All right, so the question is if we had multiple samples, like let's say we have 8 samples here on this pad, that if we come over here and let's say if we set it to that we could select like sample 1, have a different volume than this sample, than this sample. So right now, when I do this, it's global. Let's see what happens when I select the pad. If these are global, and what he's saying is that the volume would remain independent. Let's click one more time so we see the SEL kind of highlighted here. I don't remember this doing it, but I'm not absolutely sure. I don't have an instance of Groove Agent 5 to test, but it looks like if that was doing it before, I'll bring it to the attention of the team. Let me just see what happens if we adjust it without absolute mode turned on. But it looks like it's global there. So I'll bring that to the attention of the team to see if it's something that had changed in Groove Agent 6. All right, I think we answered the next question already. All right, let's go back to live questions. Thanks for sending questions in advance. It could always be done at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Great. All right, so we see John Barry just asking, any update on naming pads with Acoustic Agent and Groove Agent 6? So none. I brought it to their attention, but we will see what happens. So, all right, so we see from FlyV, it says, what are the steps to have that have to be taken to keep a song on time during creation? So if you're doing it kind of during, to keep the song on time, it's always good, So a lot of people will be very strict with, their timing. So, and, sometimes people in the early days would criticize sequenced music because it always felt very robotic. And people would, do a lot of stuff to make sure that, stuff was perfect. And there was an era where people wanted perfection from musical performances, and now with sequencing, they could quantize and have a perfect, a technically perfect recording. Now, this recording may not feel musically may not be as musically satisfying. It may not have the groove. So we went from an era where people, if you listen to old Synergy records where the guy had Larry Fast, I believe was his name, just brilliant synthesist. I think did a bunch of work with like Peter Gabriel, but he actually played all those synth parts by hand and recorded them to tape. So it could be done, but that was probably a hard process. And when we started doing it in sequencing, a lot of people liked that we could make things perfect. And then people would criticize sequencing that it has to have, that it feels like a machine. It didn't have to feel like a machine, but a lot of people made it feel like a machine because it was easy to edit, because we had a correlation between the music and the bar and beat. So, if we said, okay, we want this particular event to start right at, the bar, we could now just snap that, and we could, if we did edits, we say, okay, when I do an edit here, I'm going to take this measure out of all those tracks, that it would be perfectly on the grid. So we could do stuff like that. So a lot of people would sacrifice the feel of the music because it made editing easier. So if you want everything to be, if you want to keep a song on time during creation, sometimes songs will naturally speed up and slow down, and that's perfectly fine. And we could do tempo detection to take those songs that speed up and slow down and make the grid fit the particular music. So there's kind of choices that we have now where the musicians can follow the grid. It may sound a little more mechanical, could be easier to edit, or the grid can follow the musicians. So I tend to, with quantizing, my rule of thumb that I learned early, my personal operations and thoughts on quantizing is I wouldn't quantize everything unless it sounded weird to me. Like if it looked weird, I wouldn't necessarily quantize it. I would only try to fix something that sounded bad instead of fixing something that looked bad. So lots of people could look at meters and say, oh, all the meters are wrong. This mix is terrible. And I don't really care what the meters are saying if the mix is amazing. I'm not going to criticize an amazing sounding mix if the meters, and you look at the gain structure and it's all weird. So if you want to keep, your song on time, you could record very strictly to the grid. And if it feels good, if it's speeding up and slowing down a little bit, many classic records have done that, then then you could have the grid follow the musical performance as well. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we see from Roland Stuff says, thanks for the reminder about channel latency, how to check it. That's useful stuff to know. But even on a new empty project, The record latency is just shy of 4 seconds. Strange. Okay. So it does sound strange. If you want to send a project, if you want to email me a project, if you're starting with an empty project, if you want to email it to clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to kind of take a look at it and see if there's like, oh, like this is on or something like that. So let me know if it's every project or if it's like when you're starting off a particular project as well. So, but if you want to email me, I'd be happy to look at the particular project for you and see if we could figure it out. All right. All right, so I see from Steve Green just saying, Greg, my bad, it was acoustic agent, which they don't have. Let me see if I could jump back to find that question. Maybe Steve, it was only about 10 minutes ago, maybe if you could just remind me what the acoustic agent was. I remember your question maybe like an hour ago. Let me just see if I could scroll back and find it easily. I may have lost some of the questions when my laptop ran out of power. Let me see if I could find that. Yeah, almost back an hour. So maybe, Steve, if you could just let me know if you need more help with that particular topic. So we see kind of a follow-up from Flyv. Says, like vocals, do they usually get made during, before, or after creation? So sometimes, some of the best vocal tracks will be like someone, like I've had incredible luck where someone's just in a magic moment and they have an acoustic guitar and they nail vocal, and you have like one microphone and you position a mic and it's a great vocal, and no matter what they do, the singer can't recreate that particular feel again. That's happened in lots of recordings. There's a whole, if you watch the Bruce Springsteen movie, that there's a whole kind of vibe with that when he was working on Nebraska, when he worked on a simple 4-track recorder. And they couldn't kind of capture the feel again when they went into the, it looked like they were in, power station, and they were trying to capture that feel again that he got on the initial 4-track recording. So sometimes, a scratch vocal may just live throughout the whole production process. Sometimes people do a scratch vocal knowing that it's going to be erased, and they're not in a weird headspace, and they will just record a great vocal, and they won't be able to capture that. And we see this with film composers with temp music, where someone who's doing like editing the picture will take like a Hans Zimmer score and they kind of throw that in, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, there's the editor, the director, they've been hearing what they call temp music. And there's a whole term like temp love, where people fall in love and they get so used to hearing like something like a soundtrack that they randomly threw in, and then the composer has to try to, beat what someone is so used to hearing. So, vocals could be recorded at any stage. I would say that the general workflow is going to be, the traditional workflow is going to be like, maybe you capture a scratch vocal and then the real vocal might be recorded afterwards. But if you captured a great performance, keep the great performance at whatever stage it was recorded. All right, you see Da Vinci Girl has to take off. All right, we see Lawrence from Barn Door Recording joining from Rhode Island. Hope you're well. Thanks for being a part of the community today. You see Val has to head off. All right, we see Sable Winters. Wonderful to see you, Sable, on the live stream Zoom social. right. So we see, hi Greg, since Cubase 15, I've lost the ability to turn off as opposed to bypassing multiple effects using Q-Link, using Windows 11. All right, so let's take a look. So let's say if I'll just add some inserts in all these tracks. Maybe to accidentally exit out. Yeah, sorry. All right, so let me try that again. Okay, so let me just... All right. Sorry about that. All right, let me just try this one more time. Okay, so let's see if we now come over here. Let's say I have these tracks selected. Enable, hold down Alt or Option plus Shift. All right, I think that there's a trick. So let's say I have Q-Link on. Because I think it is because we're using kind of the same keyboard shortcut. For the, so we have to hold down, I think, the Alt modifier for both. So let's say if I come here, we have Q-Link on. But I think it is kind of the same modifier. I'm trying to remember, there's like some little trick where maybe if I hold down because it's when we use the Alt. So let's say if we take the Q-Link out, we could come here and bypass. So we can see that that's bypassed. I'm trying to remember, there's so we turned it all on. So let me see if we there's something because it uses the Alt key, the Alter Option key to bypass. And there's like some like little like hold down the Alt key. And let me just like the Alter Option plus the Shift. So we could turn it off, but I'll play around with that. But I think that there is like some way of doing the keyboard, like to hold down the modifier keys, but it's the same modifier key for bypassing is the Alter Option and the Alter Option plus Shift for the Q link to work. But I'll play around and see if I get an answer for you, John, on that by Friday. But there is some kind of like little sneaky, clever trick to do. It's evading me right now. Sorry for my brain cramp. All right, so hey Greg, does Carrier 8 and Halion 7 and Groove Agent 6 automatically sync up? And is there a button to make it sync or unsync if I want to do polyrhythms against themselves? All right, so let's take a look. I think we could probably unsync the Carrier 8. So let's load up a Halion 7. Okay, so let's say we have okay, so let's come over here to the ARP. All right, so let's say we want to now turn sync off. And I'll just go ahead and play so we hear the click as a reference. All right, so if we put it on sync. So let me take sync off and I'll put the tempo to 160. So let's set our tempo independently here. Make it just a quarter note. So if we have sync turned off, all right, let me see what happens if we adjust our tempo in the project. Let's say we'll make our tempo here 160. So it looks like you could just have it do different tempos here. And if you want to do more polyrhythms, you could come over here and just make it maybe Let's see if we could turn. So it looks like you could just adjust this sync and set that to different. And then if we come over here, let's just do. So try just turning the sync off here when you go into the arpeggiator section. And you could also choose to swing. So try just turning sync off there, Rick. Great to see you on. See, Rochester's Hip Hop says he enjoyed the Bruce Springsteen movie. Yeah, I saw it on a plane, I think when I was going out to San Antonio a couple weeks ago. All right, Pablo asks, could you remind me one more time, Greg, how to export the tracks from an audio montage as separate files? Okay, so let's get a Wavelab here. Okay, so let's say we have our montage here. All right. So I think if we go over here to in the bottom right-hand corner, we go to our render. And then we want to do a multi-render. We could do audio files. Let's see if we do active file group. Okay, so let's say we want to do audio montage, and I think the source. We want all selected tracks. Let's see if this does it. Let me just take a look in. But yeah, so just kind of come over here and just do so let's do the audio files here, all marked regions. So we have that as part of our CD. Let me just make sure I'm still in. just try putting it in a different folder real quick. I think it's going to be in here. Let me just select all the tracks here real quick. Then let's try the So I think yes, I think if we just choose let's see if we could just do the audio files. So I think it's in this area. I'll play around with it and see if I get it sorted out for Friday's live stream. Sorry about that. I know Tim Weinheimer's done it for him a couple times as well. All right, great to see Randy Lee Music on. Okay, let me see. Just see kind of a link for the Jazz Dude's providing for a mini fuse. So you see Pablo just says, I have each song on a different track. Is that correct? They don't have to be on a different track. So. All right, I think Jazz Dude just provided a link for maybe the Arteria mini fuse. Maybe it was a question that was deleted. All right, let's see if there's any other questions that pop in. If not, we'll wrap up a couple minutes early. Thanks for all the great questions. I'll see. I'll have that Wavelab thing kind of dialed in, and also on the mapping issue to switch between different mapping pages. Let me see if I could find that real quick in the MIDI remote. Okay, so you see kind of clarification. So Sable is just asking why she has latency with that interface. So one of the things is to make sure, Sable, first of all, that you have the interface defined when you go to the audio device here, that you have the actual driver defined for that particular audio interface. So if you could let us know if when you go to the Studio menu to Studio Setup and select the audio system. If you have the Mini Fuse driver set right there. So you see Sable asked why she has latency with the interface. Sorry if I missed that. Okay, so you see it. Says, I'm working on finding a fix for latency issues with the Arteria Mini Fuse, recording vocal input, Cubase 14, buffer size is 512, still haven't installed 15 Pro yet. So make sure, one, that if you have any software plugins on, that you have like those plugins turned off just as a variable, and you could always lower the latency from 512 down to like 256 and see if that makes a difference for you as well. So let me see if I can figure out one of the things from the MIDI remote here. So to get to the next page, you just look for bank. You just try next plugin parameter and previous plugin parameter. See if that's it. This was earlier a question of all right, let me just go here to focus quick controls and reset that up. All right, so let me just try this quickly, see if this is how we can switch between different pages. All right, so we have so let's say if we come over here to the quick controls, I don't think that's it. All right, so we'll see if there's other questions. Okay. See, Flyv says he really enjoys the live streams. All right. Pablo, you can ask as many Wavelab questions as you want. Okay, reading through some questions here, comments. All right, you see Tim K's broken his reading glasses. Hope you get them repaired. All right, well, it looks like we are out of questions. I'll give it another minute, see if there's any other questions that kind of pop up. If not, we will wrap up. Thanks for all the great questions. Again, you can send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. We'll be having our normal live stream on Friday. Give it another 30 seconds or so, see if there's any other questions. If not, we'll wrap. All right, you see Michael Graybill says great hangout. So I'll do some research on some of his topics that for Friday's live stream that we didn't get through today. All right, Beverly Beatty just says a question. I just moved some files around. How do I rescan? Okay, so if you come over, let's say you go to your media bay, and you can go to your computer, wherever you moved your files to. So let's say you come over here to your documents folder, and you're like, okay, I need it to look into like this particular folder. So make sure that that folder is selected. Then you could right click and choose to rescan disk. So make sure that you have these particular files that are set up. And then again, make sure it's checked in the media bay, right click, and then rescan disk, and then it should find all the relevant Cubase files. Okay, we'll see. Give it our minute, see if anyone other questions pop in. All right, well, it looks like we're done with our questions. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. And we will see everyone back on Friday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. So once again, in the United States, we will be going through daylight savings time this Sunday. So next week, it may be an hour off. I think our clocks go forward. So the live stream may start. It may be an hour off normal time. So if you check the YouTube link, if you go to youtube.com/Cubase, you could see when the start time is locally for your local time zone. So just a quick heads up with that. I'll try to remind everyone on Friday, but just so we don't miss or have people waiting an hour or come an hour late unexpectedly. So that we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for all the great questions, and we'll see everyone back on Friday. Take care.